Hi everyone, welcome back to Think BRICS. Today we have the pleasure of having Alex Krainer joining us. Alex is the founder of Krainer Analytics and creator of the iSystem trend following methodology. With nearly 3 decades of experience as a market analyst, researcher, trader, and hedge fund manager, he's also the author of Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading and Grand Deception, the Browder Hoax. Currently, he manages the Altana Inflation Trends Fund, focusing on commodities in inflationary environments. Just today, President Donald Trump reiterated his threat to impose 100% tariffs on BRICS nations if they pursue creating a new currency to replace the US dollar in international trade. This stance underscores the escalating tensions between the US and the BRICS bloc, which now comprise 10 members and 9 partners, accounting for 55% of the world's population and 37% of the global GDP in terms of purchasing power parity. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you for having me. You will please allow me just a small correction. I no longer work as a hedge fund manager, so the Altana Inflation Trends Fund that I used to manage, I no longer do. That ship sank with the pandemic.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. Sorry about that.
That's okay. An old version slipped through somehow of my bio, I guess.
Yes, okay. We've given them a plug and they didn't know, so that's nice for us. Well, given your experience, extensive experience in financial markets and commodities trading, we're eager to hear your insights on the political, economic implications of such tariffs. So I'll show the. I think this is on Truth Social. So this is the message Trump has sent. Maybe I'll read it for the viewers who are not watching. So Donald Trump says today, January 31st, 2025, quote, "The idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over. We are going to require a commitment from these seemingly hostile countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. They can go find another sucker nation. There is no chance that BRICS will replace the US dollar in international trade or anywhere else. And any country that tries should say hello to tariffs and goodbye to America." There we go. So,
well, tough talk.
Your initial reaction.
Tough talk, cowboy swagger, tough talk. Sounds great, but there's a whole lot of problems with this. American economy is a complex machine. It's integrated with the world. Any measure you take might have unintended consequences and opposite outcomes. So if we look at this, the question of tariffs, one of the reasons Trump cited for imposing 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, which are 2 of the United States' largest trade partners, was what he says are massive subsidies in terms of trade deficit. And it is true that the United States, according to the December 2024 data, just had the largest trade deficit in history, $122.1 billion. But, while this is not necessarily a good thing, it's not necessarily a bad thing either, for the following reason. Trade deficits are one of the 2 large inflation pressure exhaust valves for the US economy. So, to untangle this a little bit, there are strong inflation pressures in the United States economy. And there are two ways that the monetary inflation, that is, the central bank creating a lot of liquidity, a lot of cash, a lot of currency and pumping it into the US economy, gets absorbed away from consumer markets so that it doesn't exert pressure on consumer prices in the economy. So that, even though you have high monetary inflation, you don't have at the same time high consumer price inflation.
Price
And
inflation,
so,
right?
yeah. So one of the big, let's call it pressure release valves, is the stock market, because the money that gets absorbed into the stock market doesn't exert pressure on consumer prices in the domestic economy. And the other one is foreign trade, because the money you spend on imported goods with foreign exporting countries, that money, large part of it, remains in the current accounts of these exporting countries with the Federal Reserve Bank, and it sits there and usually gets recycled in the U.S. Treasuries. So in a way, it even helps fund the U.S. government, but it doesn't. Those sums of money don't enter the domestic consumer markets, so they don't exert upward pressure on consumer prices again. So those are the two big pressure release valves that have enabled U.S. economy to have a relatively low inflation in spite of absolutely insane increase in debt, in currency that's circulating in the U.S. economy. And so trade deficits, which would be very, very bad for a country that doesn't have a currency which is the global reserve currency and the dominant trade settlement currency in the world, would be very dangerous for the United States. It's not dangerous in the same way, and it gives the United States extra maneuvering space. But if you start imposing tariffs, and Trump is nowhere near done with Mexico and Canada. He said China is next, and he also reiterated his position that if BRICS countries persist in their intent to create some kind of an alternative trade settlement currency to the US dollar and displace US dollar, that he would impose 100% tariffs on all these countries. And then his own nominee for Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, has been advocating the idea of implementing universal 25% tariffs on everything from every country that goes into the United States. In Lutnick's reasoning is not using tariffs as a negotiating leverage or a way to exert pressure on other countries, but he justified it as a way to bring manufacturing back home. But okay, so if you go forward with all these tariffs, you are going to close the trade deficit. But by doing that, you're going to put upward pressure on consumer price inflation in your own domestic economy. And then, normally, theoretically, I guess, if you are successful in bringing back manufacturing to the United States, then you're going to create jobs, and domestic manufacturers, by competing, they should create disinflation. So by competing in the marketplace, the prices of goods should come down gradually, and then inflation pressures will subside again. But that's only if the measures are successful and with a considerable delay. It's not going to happen immediately because it takes time to set up new manufacturing and so forth. Meanwhile, the upward pressure on consumer prices at home could be almost immediate, because guess what happens if prices of Canadian or Mexican goods go up by 25%? American manufacturers are going to increase their prices almost immediately to match that, because they want to earn more money, make more profits. So that's going to happen almost immediately.
That's true.
And then if you're successful with bringing manufacturing back home, that's going to put upward pressure on wages, because there's going to be more employment, there's going to be a new demand for labor, and then the labor costs go up, and labor costs are the mother lode of inflation, because if I don't know, if prices of coffee go up, you might decide, okay, I'll drink tea or cocoa. If the price of sugar goes up, maybe you can use, I don't know, honey or artificial sweeteners, whatever. You can substitute. But labor is one of those things that you can't substitute, because every last company in your economy needs workers, needs laborers. So if you start getting labor prices to go out, then you have a practically guaranteed inflation jolt in your economy. And then what happens then is that the purchasing power of your currency starts to decline. And if the purchasing power of your currency starts to decline, then your trade partners around the world are going to want to ditch the dollar even more. And so you've actually given them even greater encouragement to say, we need an alternative to the US dollar, and to develop such alternatives. So, this is one of those examples where, if you approach a complex problem with simplistic solutions, you always risk unintended consequences and opposite outcomes. And I'm not sure whether Donald Trump is aware of this, whether people around him are advising him accordingly, or if he's simply talking tariffs in order to pressure other governments to come to an agreement that's favorable to the United States. And he doesn't, as he has done with the Colombia earlier this week. It seems like it was longer ago, but it was just a few days ago when President Petro of Colombia wanted to reject the immigrants the flights that were bringing immigrants back into Colombia. And he says, no, we're not allowing these flights in. And then Trump immediately reacted with 25% tariffs. And then President Petro said, like, oh, okay, never mind, let the flights come in. So, victory for Trump. So
it wasn't just tariffs, though, right? Sorry to interrupt. It wasn't just tariffs. He was actually going to put on the same sort of sanctions that are applied to Iran, which are probably one of the heaviest, actually blocking the banking transactions being able to be made. So it wasn't just tariffs; it was actually a lot more.
Right.
But anyway.
Right. Continue. But what I mean to say is that maybe Trump is doing all these tariffs talk in order to, let's say, intimidate other countries into complying with his demands. In case of Canada, he might want to exert pressure because he's dead serious about annexing Canada, or at least parts of Canada, western parts of Canada, to connect the U.S. territory with Alaska all the way to Alaska. So it's very difficult to know. We'll find out. But if they're going to use tariffs as a way of funding the government, the external revenue service, that the idea that he floated, and as a way of bringing manufacturing back home, they need to be very, very careful about how they handle those measures, because they could really end up yielding opposite outcomes from what they desired.
Yeah. My feeling too, Alex, is, especially in his first term, Trump talked a lot, right? He talks a lot, and obviously as a as a high-level entrepreneur, manager, or executive, you have to talk and you deal with people a lot, and you
Right.
get people to do things. And he has said this statement twice now. So
Yeah.
I don't think he understands who he's dealing with. I think, I think it's usually this sort of thing is sort of left to bureaucrats, and people in the cabinet in positions, and they deal with it very professionally, knowing inside and out what is going on, and they do deals. And I think your assessment is pretty accurate that it's an intimidation tactic, which is not really different from what we've seen from Trump. So, but knowing Trump, I have to say he will follow through. I suspect he may be, a little bit softer, or maybe a bit harder, but I think he would follow through. And yeah,
Well, I think that now in the beginning he has to follow through, because if he doesn't, then he's signaling to everybody that he's bluffing, and then
yeah,
when it comes to more important engagements, he won't be taken seriously. So he absolutely has to now. He's already painted himself into a corner, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he really actually intends this and wants this again. For whatever reason, to pressure
Ooh.
Canada. And as far as Mexico is concerned, I'm not sure what the calculus is, but there have been from the old administration, the imposter Biden administration, they were threatening Mexico with tariffs if Mexico doesn't allow U.S. Big agriculture to enter and seed GMO corn crops in Mexico. And the Mexicans are touchy about their corn, and they don't want the GMOs. So, but at the same time, this could be a huge market for American agricultural corporations. So that pressure might still exist, in the Biden administration. So we'll see what he's going to demand from Mexico. I think that the immigrants and the fentanyl, that's an obvious thing. But if you really wanted to deal with the fentanyl, you would be attacking the banking system, because without the money laundering for Mexican drug cartels, the whole command and control hierarchy of the cartels would instantly disintegrate, and the cartels would devolve into a million splinter groups that would mutually eliminate themselves. It's the money laundering banks that are enabling cartels to exist, to do what they do, to be very highly organized, with a lot of influence in the United States, a lot of influence in Mexico, and to continue in operation in spite of what law enforcement attempts to do. So I think if the fentanyl was a problem, then you would go against money laundering banks, which is pretty much all the GSIBs.
yeah, no,
Global systemically important banks, as listed by the Bank of International Settlement.
yeah, which is their usual justification for not doing it. See, that's what I like about you, Alex, because I've listened to you a few times myself, is that you, and the other analysts do, but I find that you go straight to the point, the very important point, and are bold enough to actually say that. And that's a very important point. Maybe Trump's tackling it through a different direction, but look, I appreciate you giving us your initial reaction. We've got some prepared questions, so let me start with that. So, even though the BRICS nations are trying to rely less on the US dollar and are calling for de-dollarization, the dollar's share of global payments has hit a 12-year high of 49.1%. So, with the dollar looking so strong and the BRICS nations saying they're not trying to replace it, which they've said many times, does Trump's new threat to impose 100% tariffs show he's serious about protecting the dollar, or is it just a tactic for other political or economic goals? And you've touched on this a bit, but if you want to say more, or we can go to the next question.
I think he cannot counter this. You cannot force nations that constitute more than half of the world population and more than 35% of the global GDP into obeying you for what reason? Why should they? Why should they not have alternatives? And anyhow, US dollar, like every fiat currency in the history of mankind, will go to zero. Every fiat currency in history of mankind has gone to zero because there's nothing backing it. It's losing purchasing power continuously and progressively. It has lost more than 99% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve Bank has been created, and which has the monopoly on issuing U.S. currency notes. And ultimately, there will have to be an alternative, whether he likes it or not. So, risking to alienate your global trade partners around the world, enforcing something that's unsustainable anyhow, is, I think, ill-advised, and it's in fact so badly ill-advised that I think he must be doing for reasons other than what is apparent, what is being stated out in the open. Dollar is going to collapse like all other fiat currencies. There's no doubt about that. It's a mathematical certainty. Alternatives will be needed. Now, when it comes to alternatives, it does appear that Trump is looking at creating this Milton Friedman utopia of a free market for privately issued cryptocurrencies.
Oh God, right.
Yeah, and that is an even more dangerous idea if it turns out to be true, because then we're going to a crypto version of the Lombard banking system that we had in the 1300s and 1400s in Europe, and which originated in Italy. And it was a complete disaster. It starts off well. One business cycle, everybody's happy because there's new credit circulating, but then it goes into a contraction that is irreversible, and it goes into almost complete societal collapse, warfare, civil wars, social uprisings, plagues, because social services fall apart, trash is no longer collected, water treatment is not. This is what we had at the end of the Lombard banking system. Coincided with these plagues that wiped out a third of the population in Europe. So privately issued fiat is not a good way to go about it. And I think, I read Sergei Glaziev's statements on all this, and I much prefer the Russian and Chinese approach of studying the problem matter carefully and working on solutions that are going to not destabilize the system. The American way is a little bit of a gunslinger approach, where they basically careen from crisis to crisis and make things up as they go along. And I really hope that what we're witnessing these days, early days of the Donald Trump administration, is Trump's swagger, preparing his negotiating position, using his economy, his dollar as a leverage, as a pressure on other countries. But I hope that he has advisors who can actually pull away from the brink, because this idea of privately issued cryptocurrencies is really, really ill-advised. It's rooted in free market ideology, Milton Friedman and Murray Rothbard and all this, but it does require much, much more careful study. You can't just declare that everything private and everything unregulated is super awesome automagically. and then just let it all go by its own inertia, because we do have historical precedents for this, and they didn't go well at all.
No, definitely. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was thinking that when you were giving your initial reaction, what would USA's economy be like in this situation if you didn't have such rampant, unregulated private power in the corporations? You still had state banking, national banking, you had state banks like North Dakota, you had infrastructure was still owned by the government, being run by the government. The government wasn't, paying contractors 3, 4 times, 5 times as much as they would an actual government employee for the same services. Would you still, as you were speaking about, price inflation, would it still be such an issue? But I'm glad you mentioned Sergei Glaziev, who's an advisor to Putin. And just I'll go to that question. He says that Trump might be just trying to come up with an alternative financial system that's based on cryptocurrencies, which could mess with the whole dollar-based system we've got going on. So you said that Trump's actions don't seem to have a big picture approach. If he's trying to protect the dollar but messing up the system at the same time, what could go wrong? As you said, we can have pestilence, much reduced services. In the financial system, what could go wrong?
Well, as I suggested a few minutes ago, one of the things that could go wrong is that you get a reacceleration of inflation and erosion of dollars purchasing power. And that would have very important implications for the domestic U.S. economy, but it would also have implications of American foreign trade. And when you have inflation, then it becomes a political problem as well, because people in government will try to, there's always a knee-jerk reaction to try to control prices and to impose price controls. The banking system will try to point blame on merchants, and they will say like, the merchants are being greedy, and then maybe like in the Roman Empire, you're going to have some Diocletian who's going to impose price limits on what you can sell at what price. And when you do that, you end up getting shortages of stuff in the market, because merchants simply won't be selling things at a loss. And then you get the emergence of gray markets and black markets where people charge unofficial prices, which are much higher than the official prices, than the government mandated prices, and the whole system goes into from imbalance to greater imbalance, and you could even have a certain unraveling of the political structures in the United States, because maybe then states are going to be reasserting their right and maybe proposing issuing state currencies. It's hard to envision all these things, but when people lose confidence in their currency, then a lot of unpredictable things start to happen. In specific terms, you can, in terms of market predictions, you could fairly confidently predict 3 things: that the value of US dollar goes down, even though we have to talk about commodities here, right? Because other currencies, the idea that the dollar's value is going to go down versus the euro or British pound or yen or other currencies, that's very hard to predict, because all those countries are in as much, if not more, trouble economically, right? So, the pound and the euro will most probably collapse faster than the US dollar. But in terms of commodity prices, you can predict that dollar is going to be losing value. So you're going to be seeing much higher energy prices, metals, agricultural commodities. you will also see an increase in interest rates. And so the collapse in the prices of bonds. And the third effect will be that the stock market most probably is going to accelerate into a bull market. And the reason why that happens is because as people lose, on the one hand, the central bank is obliged to flood the market with liquidity to keep it from seizing up. But as people lose confidence in the currency, they try to get rid of it as fast as they can and to acquire real assets while they can. And so a lot of the money gets pumped into the stock market. And so they bid up the prices of stocks. And at some, in many cases, the stocks go practically vertical. And we've seen that, 100 years ago in the Weimar Republic, in 1921, 1922. We saw this in 1986 in Israel. We saw it in Zimbabwe, 2008, 2009. We saw it in Argentina. We saw it in Venezuela. It's not a symptom of a great economy. It's a symptom of a collapsing system and people scrambling to acquire real goods and get rid of the currency in which they lose confidence.
I see. That's very helpful. I mean, predictions, obviously, when you ask analysts market predictions, but we're actually talking about the physical universe here. So I think you're not making any fantastical.
Oh no. This has happened many times in history, and it is a very concrete prediction, and I'm very confident about it. But it's still a pretty worthless prediction because if you're speculating and trading on these things, timing is everything. So if you make a bet on something too soon or too late, it's you're better off not making it. So it's not necessarily helpful in this sense, but it is something that we will see. We can't predict when, but we are almost certainly going to see it again. Most probably first in the UK, followed by Europe and Japan. I don't know which one might be first, the second domino to fall. But the United States will not be able to exempt itself from the laws of economics because no empire in the history of humanity was able to exempt itself. All empires collapsed, every last one of them. And so will the United States. So if I were sitting in the Oval Office and advising Donald Trump, I would advise him that what is necessary at this point is a root and branch reassessment of how to deal with the crisis and a complete overhaul of economic and financial policies and even geopolitical strategies, because part of what's dragging the United States down is the cost of maintaining the empire. And to be fair, I see that Donald Trump is dead serious about cutting all this off. But in the domestic economy, you have to focus on domestic production, and you have to. It seems that they are focused on doing this. But where I'm wary a little bit is that he's already going with these tariff threats before he's even brought production back home. So you should. I think that you should try to start the tidal wave of manufacturers coming back home, of small and medium-sized businesses starting to hire people, that you see a growth in employment, that you see growth in production, that you see the markets flooded with made in USA goods, and then begin with the tariffs in a judicious way and gradually, and base the economic growth on small and medium-sized enterprise, create favorable conditions for local and regional banks to fund small businesses, family companies, give them favorable long-term loans, and so forth. So if I were able to advise Donald Trump, this is what I would advise him. I don't know whether people around him see things this way. I would expect that they do, because they're smart people, and these things are not difficult to find out. You have the internet, you have practically the whole knowledge base of humanity at your disposal. Now you even have AI engines that can tell you the story. You don't even have to read all the articles and papers that are out there. And and so I assume that people around him are smart enough to know all these things. And when it comes to actual policy implementations, that it will go to, as you mentioned, to different government bureaucracies where you have competent professionals in charge, rather than the gunslinger in chief just shooting his mouth off and getting people confused about like what he really intends to do. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, definitely. Well, the Federal Reserve has been pretty aggressive with its monetary policies recently, like raising interest rates, and that's made the dollar stronger, I assume. The US dollar is seen as a safe bet during times of geopolitical uncertainty, but with Trump threatening 100% tariffs and having a go at BRICS countries, how's that going to affect global financial stability and the dollar's long term dominance?
I'm not sure. Well, okay, so let's say that they go through with these tariffs. You're going to catalyze an acceleration in inflation. That inflation will very likely come also from abroad in terms of higher commodity prices, because the United States, the United States is biggest exporter of energy today, of oil and gas. But they still have to import oil, because the domestic production of oil is a light oil, which you can use for production of gasoline, but not for diesel, and and not for jet fuel. And so all of your planes run on jet fuel, all of your trucks and tractors and industrial machines and ship, they require diesel and heavy fuels, and those the United States still has to import. So you're going to have energy price inflation. You're going to have labor inflation. You're going to have metals going higher, gold and silver and copper and other metals, rare earths, all of the things that you need for your advanced technological production. If that happens, then your foreign trade partners are going to want to be paid in something other than the US dollars. Now, if you have the military that intimidates everyone around the world, and military bases and carrier strike groups that are ready to hop into action and put a gun to everybody's head and say, no, you will accept our dollars in payment for all these things. Well, in that case, countries will succumb, they will prostrate themselves, and they will say like, okay, we'll send you all our produce and fruits of our labor, and we will take your dollars. And we know that most of it will fit in Federal Reserve current accounts. And then we will invest it in your government's treasuries so we can help fund your operation. But if the purchasing power of the dollar is declining, then countries will seek alternatives. And if they're no longer intimidated by your carrier strike groups, they will say, okay, well, in that case, we will no longer ship goods to your shores. And then you have a big problem, because now you're going to have even more shortages, even more upward price pressure, and you're getting into this self-reinforcing collapse cycle that has, hit every empire on its way down. And if you look at the history of Roman Empire, you can actually see, they couldn't print currency because the Romans used the honest money, quote unquote. They used silver denarius, right? So it was real. It was the honest money. But what they could do is dilute the silver content of the denarius, right? And so we have charts today where it shows the silver content of denarius, which starts at 95%, and then it goes gradually down as the burden of financing the empire was increasing, and the treasury was getting more and more strained. And then at a certain point in time, which absolutely coincides with the decline of the Roman Empire, you see that the silver content of denarius accelerates downward, and then it just continues going down until it reaches, I think, 0.5%, where the denarius was just a copper coin with a very thin coating of silver on it. And that dynamic is rooted in economics. You can't go forever spending lavishly while your treasury is getting increasingly depleted. And then when your treasury is getting depleted, you can only go so far by shaking down everybody by force and through intimidation. That also runs its course pretty quickly. And then the collapse accelerates. This is why I think that if the United States persists in using the imperial levers of power, it'll only be to their long-term detriment. Whereas if they realize that this is a road to perdition, and that they have to completely overhaul their social and economic setup and reorient themselves to creating prosperity domestically on the basis of small and medium-sized enterprise economy, then they can turn the ship around. They can correct course and let's say become a leading regional power again. Not a how do you call it? Not an empire, not a global superpower, but a regional power. Well, they are a regional power now, but they're a regional power in decline, and they can become a regional power in or at least close to its zenith.
You brought up interesting what I found over the years, and I'm 49, 48, 40, you forget. America, you do, right, after a while. But, America was really known for the small enterprises.
Yes.
Very high quality products too. And also products where, in those small family or, medium size, you could see the continuously improvement of that product or service. And they have a very strong tradition of doing that. It's certainly, and I'm mentioning this because you mentioned it, but I'm mentioning this in relation because we're just talking about the Fed in this little cycle here. But when we had national banking and the Congress or the Parliament was actually in control of directing credit, the state credit, there was not a one-size-fits-all rate, cash rate set by the private banks. And so you could actually, if the government was actually in control of its own, it had actually had sovereignty, then it could direct growth into, as you say, that would be the logical and the best way to do it. And capitalizing on the strength of America, it's people, it's innovative people that are willing to grow their economy, willing to work and have a lot of pride, national pride. So I think that's very interesting. I'll ask the next question. While BRICS nations are looking at alternatives to the dollar, loads of countries are still they still rely on the dollar because it's stable and easy to use, especially during economic turbulence. But with Trump threatening to pull out, the BRICS nations might be pushed to speed up their efforts to move away from the dollar. So could Trump's actions accidentally make them move away from the dollar and making it stronger and speed up the creation of an alternative financial system?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. This is exactly what I was saying, that I'm concerned that in more than one way he could be getting the opposite of his desired of what he desires to achieve with all these measures. That he could actually push countries into speeding up their efforts to find an alternative.
They have the courage. These countries are going to have to stand up.
It takes less and less courage, in a sense that 20 or 30 years ago nobody dared. Well, even during his first administration, nobody dared to defy the United States of America, because they could bring you those JSOC special forces, Joint Special Operations Command, in a flash. They had these they still have these carrier strike groups that would just come close to your shore with all their missiles and aircraft, and they didn't even have to do anything. People would just soil themselves and say, like, okay, boss, whatever you say. But now 2021 August, they got kicked out of Afghanistan by the Taliban. Didn't look good. Now they've been running their Operation Prosperity Guardian, in the Red Sea. How long? 15 months. They still haven't been able to subdue Ansar Allah in Yemen. In fact, Ansar Allah is running circles around them. And now you also have the advent of hypersonic precision guided missiles, which can sink an aircraft carrier like nothing. Like it can cut through it like hot knife through butter. So, Russia has them, Iranians have them, apparently Yemenis have them as well. And so they are, the people are less and less intimidated by these carrier strike groups, and this was the carrier strike groups were the main means of power projection for the United States, for the empire, right? And the power projection was one of the main levers of imposing this, unipolar global order, the rules-based order on everybody else. It's run its course. It's obsolete. It's the realignment of forces in the world takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is happening as we speak. And if you want to try to reverse it by force, it's pretty much the story of King Canute flogging the waves to stem the tide. It just doesn't work. I don't know of a single episode in history where a declining empire managed to reverse its decline. Roman Empire had to actually split up, and a completely different empire emerged in the Byzantium in the east. But the Western Roman Empire just went straight down to nothing, to where it for a few centuries the concrete floors disappear from the how do you call it? Not agricultural, but what do you call that? People who dig the dirt to find old stuff. No.
Archaeologists.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Blank that. It disappeared from archaeological record. The markets for mass production cheap goods that are essential to the functioning of a community, like roof tiles and and nails, and
Mm.
that vanishes. Currency completely vanishes in Western Europe for a few centuries, except for the Kingdom of Cordoba under the Muslim rule. And so the the collapse, if you just let it to its own inertia, can go as far and as deep as returning us to the Copper Age, to the to back to being hunter-gatherer nomads, with some settlement. Roads implode, public services disappear, maintenance of large buildings goes away. For a few centuries, Roman ruins were grazing grounds for um, for sheep and cows. That's how bad it can get. We have to, recognize these realities. We have to try to understand the social and economic dynamics that generate prosperity, or in the opposite direction, lead us to complete devastation of civilization. And then we have to have the wit and the courage and the wisdom to reverse course, to understand what we're doing wrong, and to try to right it. And I don't know how much pain it takes to do that, but the United States is now at the receiving end of a lot of that kind of pain, where we just saw this week DeepSeek AI completely eclipsed the $500 billion US AI industry, and they achieved that with an investment of less than $10 million. I mean, it's absolutely massive. We've seen that American military industrial complex, in spite of a nearly $1 trillion budget, is now completely outclassed by Russian and Chinese and probably even Iranian military industries. We've seen that American nuclear power generation industry is now a generation behind the Chinese, and who can deliver nuclear power plants faster, cheaper, and produce energy that is a fraction of the cost of American nuclear power plants. So it's just, and not to mention American healthcare industry, which is almost a fifth of the American GDP, and has the worst outcomes of any advanced nation's health system. There's just one thing after another. You see symptoms of decay or falling behind. American education is now lagging well behind other developed nations. And so the more examples you look at, the more prevalent it becomes. 20 years ago, the United States was the global leader in, I think, 60 out of 64 advanced technology industries in the world. Today, and China was only leading in 3 or 4. Today, the relationship is almost inverse. China is leading, I think, in 57 out of 64, and the United States is leading maybe in 6 or 7 of them. So it's not, it's not just AI, it's not just military industry, it's not just healthcare or just nuclear power plants. It's across the board. And people in the White House, in the executive, in the presidential administration of Donald Trump, they better understand this. And they can't reverse it by telling China, we're going to impose tariffs on you. BRICS, we're going to impose tariffs on you. We're going to hurt you. We're going to squeeze you over there. You're not going to reverse that. The world is just simply going to leave you behind.
Yeah. Actually, that brings up a very interesting point you're making there, Alex. The way Russia and China diplomatically deal with USA's. intimidations and announcements, right? Because it's obviously the media is very heavy, slanted towards USA, but the way they deal with it shows what you just said, that they realize that the destruction of the USA is not good for the rest of the world. You know, if it collapses in a way that you're talking about the Roman Empire, then that's really actually dangerous for the rest of the world. And so they are always very wisely, and I always think, you know, I guess, and I assume people in the USA think that these countries are weak, even though they're wisely trying to deal with the USA in a way that doesn't hurt them as well. They're people, more importantly.
Yes, yes. You're absolutely right. And Sergei Karaganov, who I think that his statements pretty much reflect the mindset of the Russian leadership and probably Chinese leadership by extension as well. He said that we have to help the United States transition from being a global empire to being just a major global power, regional power, in 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 a way that's as peaceful and non-disruptive as possible. And I think that this is what they're doing. They're just trying to ease the United States from being the global hegemon into being just one of the major powers in the world without hurting the United States and the American people, without causing conflict and destruction between the United States and other powers, and without without risking that we end up. I don't even like to mention this, but it's always a possibility that we end up in a nuclear war.
I hope not. Look, it's been a great discussion with you, Alex, and I really appreciate you coming on at such short notice. We'll end it off. Maybe if you just want to make some final remarks, and then we'll end off.
Well, I think that we are at a very critical point in history where I think that humanity has a choice of what kind of a future we want to create. For the people in the West, and particularly the American people, I think it's important to recognize, and I think that many of them do recognize this, that this is up to the American people. This is up to us, all of us. In the same way that the American people managed to defeat the Democratic administration of Joe Biden and their attempt to stay in the White House and steal another election, is the same way that they can continue to exert pressure on the political leadership to lead them towards the outcomes that the people desire. And, I think that in the final analysis, we all desire the same thing. We want our children to inherit a better world from us. We want them to live in prosperity and security. We want them to have beautiful, productive lives and enjoy themselves, right? To feel the joy and happiness that living makes possible. And that's down to the people. So it's not, let's now, we got Trump elected, let's now watch what he does. No, continue to exert pressure, continue to demand solutions, measures, and everything that you see bringing us closer to the future that you want, or better, the future that we want our children to have and their children. And so today, this is more possible than ever before in the history of mankind. Today we have practically all of the humanities knowledge, heritage available to us instantly. We can research and understand everything about anything. If it comes to reformulating our society's operating systems, we should be perfectly capable of doing that and redesigning an operating system. The operating system under which we, or like as they like to call it, the system of governance that we've had for the last 500 years has been pretty much contrived by the money lending oligarchies, by the banking elite of this world, to their benefit and for our detriment. And we have the opportunity to change that, to turn that around, which I think would bring us to a completely new reality that maybe we've never experienced in history before, but which could potentially be beyond our most optimistic imagination about what future could be like. And so I think that what that demands of us is that we keep our eyes and ears and minds open, that we continue studying, researching, analyzing, communicating, doing these talks like we are doing today, and that we communicate with other people and spread the knowledge, spread the ideas, discuss the solutions. The wonderful thing about the internet is that you don't have to have all the answers. And, you can risk blundering. The people out there set you straight almost instantly. If you get something wrong, and everybody gets stuff wrong all the time, boy, they set you straight almost instantly. So, there's no harm in communicating ideas and proposals and solutions, and maybe in the process that's organic in some way, we refine the concepts continuously. I always like the Milton Friedman. Isaac Newton's quote. He said that if he was able to see farther, it's because he was able to stand on the shoulders of giants. And I think that today we not only can stand on the shoulders of giants, but I think that we are continuously climbing higher and higher on top of one another in a process that is almost organic, and maybe if you can envision it, it's almost like a vine going higher and higher continuously with an energy and with a determination. And so I think we just have to continue that. And who knows, maybe our children, grandchildren, grandchildren are going to be amazed at the realities that they're going to be living in the future.
That's a really good sentiment, and I totally agree with you, Alex. Thank you very much again for coming at such short notice.
It's my pleasure, Clive. Thank you for having me, and as always, warm greetings to all your viewers and listeners.
Awesome. Okay, let's end off. All right, thank you everyone for coming to this very short notice live stream with Alex. Please like the show, share it with your network, and please subscribe. Please look up Alex, follow him, interact with him, and thank you very much.